Okay, different project. The work that I was actually hired to do as a PhD student was to work with this broader effort called the Vermont Agricultural Resilience in a Changing Climate Initiative. Quite a mouthful. And I'm going to just take the rest of my time to kind of tell you what we're looking at, what it's about, what we hope to get from it, and then I'll leave the rest of the time for a few questions. So it's a big project. There are lots of UVM people involved, which is this slide. My point person, my faculty advisor is Ernesto Mendez. He's an agroecologist. He specializes in looking at coffee systems, actually, and biodiversity, but he has been working more in Vermont, trying to really identify what are the big problems that Vermont producers are facing, and how do we use an approach that involves bringing together lots of different types of expertise to solve those problems. So for this particular project, we have kind of as our faculty members, Carol Adair, who's a climate scientist, Linda Berlin, who's the director of the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, David Connor, who's an economist, Heather Darby, who some of you might know from Extension, Stephanie Hurley, who specializes in water management systems and landscape visualization, and Chris Kaliba and Asim Zia, who both look at climate change issues in the context of policy and governance. So we have all these people trying to kind of put their brains together to both define the research question and the answer to that research question. We don't believe that we can solve this problem on our own, just sitting in the ivory tower. So we have an advisory committee, of which Leslie Ann is one member. We're really lucky to have her. We also try to kind of use this committee to share what we're working on to make sure that it's grounded. So we have extension folks, some farmers, someone from UNH, and Jake Claro, who's part of the Farm to Plate effort, which you probably know about. And then also, just trying to keep the project at large integrated with what else is going on in terms of working on climate change in the state. So the big things that we're trying to do, as I understand it, we're trying to look at what farmers are already doing. What are their best management practices, which is a term that's kind of tossed around as something that's, a practice that's been vetted, that's been proven to be useful, that's been proven not to do too much harm. Which of these practices have the potential to be climate change best management practices? What do farmers do that can limit the amount of risk that they face because of climate change? And how can we provide more information about how climate change is going to be affecting farmers and what they can do to help themselves? Very simplified, this is kind of like a timeline of the project. I'll break it down. We're going to get our context and figure out what's already been done. We're going to do our research. We're going to share our results. I can speak best to two small parts of the work. The first is a review of the Vermont Veg and Berry Growers Association, their reports from the field. Do any of you know, are any of you familiar with reports from the field? No? Every year, or every couple of weeks in the summer and every month in the winter, Vern Grubinger sends out a call to Vermont farmers and asks them just to write a quick paragraph about what's going on in their farm. He's been doing it since 1998. They have a great kind of cataloging of all this information. I went through with a couple of my research assistants and coded for every time somebody mentioned climate change, anytime anyone mentioned an extreme weather event, and specific pests and plant diseases to try and get a gauge on how farmers are thinking about climate change or aren't. Or are they talking about extreme weather or aren't they? And what we found is that climate change really has only started to come up in what people are kind of casually reporting in the very recent history of the listserv. However, people have been talking about extreme weather for a long time, and that makes sense. We as individuals experience weather. It's really hard for us to experience climate. As Leslie Ann was saying, climate is something that we see trends over decades or even longer. But what we what we can tell is that it's raining really hard right now, or there wasn't much snowpack this year. And I think that's a really important distinction. I have a friend who says, climate is what tells you what to keep in your closet, and weather is what tells you when to wear it. So the other piece of the work that I'm doing is I'm part of this on-farm research team that is looking at these specific best management practices that I mentioned. My training is in qualitative research, meaning I go out and interview people about why they do, what their motivating factors are, what the constraints on them are. And we decided, based on the expertise of the rest of the team, that we would try and look at specific best management practices. We'd look at cover crops, we'd look at tillage techniques, we'd look at water management, and we'd look at grazing. And everybody is still doing this work. It's like a year-long on-farm research project. The farms that we're looking at, there are 12 of them. We tried to stratify them by vegetable, dairy, meat, or diversified producers, but as many of you know who know farmers or who grew up on farms, in Vermont people do a lot of everything. So it's really hard to bin people. But nevertheless, it's been really interesting to have those conversations. And as I mentioned, these are kind of the components of the on-farm sampling. I'm doing the interviews. The economist on our team is doing a financial analysis of specific practices, so we can say, well, yes, you might want to put in conservation buffers because it's a great, stormwater management tool, but how does that affect your sales or your ability to produce a certain amount of crop X? So really recognizing that there's a financial implication for everything that you do on a farm. And then measuring CO2 sequestration and greenhouse gas emissions, landscape visualization, which I'm going to explain in just a second, and water quality assessments. We're working with Stone Environmental to do some edge of field monitoring of water runoff that will be really interesting, I think. So for the whole time that we were getting ready to do this project, I kept hearing landscape visualization. I can't even say it. Landscape visualization, and I didn't really understand what that meant, so I wanted to put it up here for you, because once I finally got some visuals for the visual component of this project, it was a little bit of an aha moment. So Stephanie Hurley, who's the faculty member who is working on this, basically uses Photoshop. And she takes a picture of an existing condition, which in this case is a flooded out field down at the Intervale, and she overlays it. And she said, well, this is what I would think it would look like if you added some hoop houses. If you put some more, scrub over here, let this grow up for pollinator habitat. If you diversified what you planted in this field a little bit more. So it hopefully will be useful to inform farmer decision making if they're considering adopting a practice but aren't really quite sure how they want to do it or if they want to do it. It gives kind of some information to those of us who are visual learners. And there is research that this has been useful in other contexts for other kind of land management decisions, but it is the first time that it's been applied to agricultural systems. So it's kind of interesting. And then the greenhouse gas measurements, I have no idea how those things work. But basically, my understanding is that Carol and her graduate student are syncing these into different fields based on different management strategies. So, for example, at Shelburne Farms, they're putting one in an area where they've done rotational grazing and one in an area where they haven't, and they're trying to track what the difference is in emissions. Because we have all this anecdotal information that grazing sequesters carbon and this sequesters carbon, but this is a really good way to test, in Vermont, in this context, is that true? And as I mentioned, a really big emphasis of our work is on extension and outreach, so once we have stuff to share, we hope to share it, both with general public and with farmers and with technical service providers, such as yourselves. So I thought I would just end by opening it up. We have 7 minutes for kind of discussion, which might feel short, but maybe that can just be the official part of the discussion. I wanted to hear from you all what about today in general, not just my presentation, was interesting or exciting or...
You your, for this Drosophila,
Uh-huh.
what are the pesticides we can use, and if they are systemic, is there any washing or soaking that, or vinegar that gets that out? And do you eat the larva?
So the question is, for the pesticides, what are they? And does washing help? And do you eat larvae? I'll answer them in reverse order.
Okay.
You eat larvae all the time.
Okay.
They are an excellent source of protein. There is no health risk. I think we all eat more bugs than we think, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think the bigger concern is, will somebody return a pint of raspberries? So that leads to the second question, which is, can washing help with pesticide residue? I have to admit, I have a little bit of organic blinders on. This is something that I'm working on for kind of my professional development, but because I'm an organic grower and because I've kind of grown up in this like sustainability farming box, I don't have as wide a breadth of knowledge about pesticides and how to manage them safely. So I don't know about the washing times or the washing and safety. I think my understanding is that most pesticides do wash off, but have you ever tried washing raspberries?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think some fruits can be washed and some fruits can't, and its effect on shelf life is always questionable. I know commercial growers don't generally wash raspberries. It's one of the big things with like food safety, right, that's coming out about triple washing and quadruple washing and whatever. Raspberries just don't hold up on the shelf. So even if they're not coming out of your garden, I would always recommend washing raspberries right before you eat them. The pesticides, I have it in my notes, but I don't know them off the top of my head. I do know there are 3 classes of conventional pesticides that are approved. For organic growers, there is 1 class, but there's nothing to rotate it with, so it's not recommended. I can get you that information if you like.
You were talking in the beginning when you were talking about your own farm, you said that water management was something that was really key and that what you were focusing on.
Absolutely.
And I think where I am, whether it's too much water or too little water, that's also a concern that I have. What are the different strategies that you use as a farmer in where you are? Because Moncton, are you up on the ridge or are you?
We're off the ridge, but we're over by Ravens Ridge, and we're kind of.
Okay, so what are you doing with your water management now?
That's it. So Ellen's question was, what are we doing with the water management on our farm? So that's partly why I put out there, we do have a well. It's 40 gallons a minute. I feel pretty lucky, but I haven't been there through a drought, so I don't actually know how that water supply will hold up. I'm kind of crossing my fingers. Long-term plan is to put in a farm pond, but we all know that's an expensive venture. My irrigation system right now is barely effective, and part of that is just my learning curve. We have a frost-free hydrant that fits a regular hose fitting, and I have a 3/4 inch pipe that runs up my hill and back down, and I run my drip tape off of leaders from that main pipe, but it's too small a diameter to really get the kind of water pressure that I need, so I can only run maybe 5 rows of drip tape at a time. And we have, give or take at different points of the season, between 70 and 92 beds. So it makes for a lot of running around. There's a lot of leaky connections. Drip tape is always kind of marginally effective after the first year. But it's better for food safety and it's better for plant health than a lot of overhead irrigation. So we toss up. I definitely think my long-term plan is to get some sort of attachment to our actual well that'll allow me to put an aluminum pipe on to run to the top of the hill and then rely on gravity for the rest of it. But it's challenged, but I'm glad I have it. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
We've had some bad drought years, and then everything, ponds, the brook, all our water supply where everything dries up.
Mm.
So we put a big pipe that's this big around from out in the woods up, I think it's about a quarter of a mile far up into the woods, in a big brook that never goes dry,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of slowly come down the hill, and then put it in the brook that's dry, and then it just keeps everything the whole summer.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really good tactic for. Oh, so sorry. You were relating about you kind of drawing water from a stream or a brook that kind of was consistently running to one that was less reliably running to ensure that you had access to water. One of the things that I struggle with as a commercial grower is that we have a lot of food safety regulations that are coming down the pike. And surface water for irrigation is a really big no-no in there. So as I think kind of long-term about what we're going to do to have a really reliable source of water, I'm really thinking about underground sources as my main source if I can. The pond is kind of an emergency backup, but I need to learn more, and I'm not sure they're even written yet what the regulations will be about length of time in between watering and harvest, or it's tricky, it's complicated, and it's going to affect all commercial growers, but it really does hinge on this food safety issue. I think where food safety comes together with issues about on-farm water use and climate change is going to be fascinating, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be easy. Yeah.
Hi, I grow a lot of fruit bushes that you mentioned, including the currants and all of that. I live at 1,500 feet in South Sarksboro, and I'm very fortunate that I do not have the spotted fruit fly yet, but I'm expecting it this year pretty much. So since I also sell some of these bushes, I get an enormous amount of questions about the fruit fly. Do I understand from you, if people tend to buy or would be tending to buy the earlier ripening fruits, that they have a better chance?
Yes, so, and that's actually one of the things that's really hopeful for the blueberry growers in the room is if you can select varieties that ripen earlier, you have a better chance of experiencing lower levels of infestation. When we did our trapping out last summer, just to kind of see how the population ebbed and flowed, we didn't see a spike in population until August. And then it was devastating. But in general, earlier fruits are better. So thank you very much for your attention.